In 5 years, I accompanied Ethan from having nothing to achieving great success. However, his first love, who once despised Ethan for being penniless, came back. I worked my ass off to build up the company, while she reaped the benefits without doing anything and instantly became the secretary to the general manager. On the day I left the company, she said to me with confidence and certainty, "I believe Ethan has never loved you." I saw Yolanda again at Grandpa's funeral. Ethan and I were kneeling in front of the tombstone, and she was standing beside Ethan. She was still as pale and delicate as ever, looking extremely charming, crying her heart out as if she were Grandpa's own granddaughter. But in the next second, she fell straight to the ground and landed steadily in Ethan's arms. "Yolanda." Ethan called her name anxiously, picked her up and rushed out of the cemetery quickly, without ever looking back at me. I thought I had melted his icy heart in these 5 years, but now everything has gone back to zero. I pretended not to hear the whispers of the relatives and continued to handle the subsequent procedures, expressing my gratitude to the guests who came to offer their condolences with perfect manners. After all the guests had left, I took out my phone and dialed Ethan's number. "Come home tonight. I have something important to talk to you about." That night, I was sitting in the study waiting for him, reading the divorce agreement in my hand over and over again. With Yolanda's return to the country and Grandpa's death, the only obstacle between them and being together was me. Divorcing me was just a matter of time. By taking the initiative, I could at least retain a little dignity. Time passed by minute, but Ethan never came back. I casually tidied up the desk and found a book with its corners already damaged under a pile of documents. This book was Yolanda's favorite. She didn't take it with her when she went abroad. I didn't expect that he had been treasuring it all this time. I closed the book with a bitter smile and tidied up the desk for him. At 10 o'clock, Ethan finally came back. "Is Yolanda all right?" I asked him, pretending to be calm. "She's fine. She was just a bit emotional." I forced a smile. I didn't expect she had such deep feelings for Grandpa. Yolanda is a person who values friendship. After all, Grandpa used to love her like a granddaughter-in-law. Hearing the words, granddaughter-in-law, I was a bit distracted. Ethan also realized he had made a slip of the tongue and obediently shut his mouth. I handed the divorce agreement to him, and the surprise in his eyes flashed by. "I don't want the company's shares. I'll just take what I deserve." Ethan seemed incredulous, and his hand clutching the agreement tightened slightly. "Yvonne, why do you want to divorce me?" Why was he still asking when he knew the answer? To preserve my last bit of dignity, I brought up what he had said before we got married. "Before we got married, you said that marrying me was to fulfill Grandpa's wish. If I changed my mind, we could get divorced at any time." He seemed to have forgotten what he had said, frowning tightly and standing there in a daze. "Find a time to go and handle the divorce formalities." I thought he would be overjoyed and then be extremely grateful to me. Who knew he would suddenly start stammering? "The transfer of shares takes time. Let's handle the formalities after the property handover is completed." "Fine. When everything is settled, we'll have nothing to do with each other anymore. Then handle it as soon as possible." Ethan nodded with a complicated expression. I simply washed up, threw Ethan's pillow onto the sofa, and lay alone in the middle of the bed. In a half-awake state, I felt someone lying beside me, with the smell of water vapor and body wash. I woke up suddenly and saw clearly by the moonlight that it was Ethan. "Why don't you go sleep in the second bedroom?" In the first year of our marriage, he always slept in the second bedroom. "We're not divorced yet, are we?" How ridiculous. How could he comfort his tearful first love one day and say such things to me the next day? "We can go get divorced tomorrow." I hugged the pillow, turned over and got up, and went to sleep in the second bedroom. I tossed and turned, and the image of Ethan's grandpa kept popping up in my mind. Under the long corridor covered with wisteria flowers, the old man in the wheelchair looked at me with a loving expression. The wrinkles on his face were the gentle marks of time. "If you and Ethan are happy together, that's Grandpa's biggest wish." Finally, things didn't go as people wished. Right after Grandpa passed away, Ethan and I were also going to part ways. In college, Ethan and Yolanda were deeply in love, while I was just a bystander. After graduation, Yolanda got a government-funded scholarship to study abroad and resolutely broke up with him. That was the toughest time for Ethan. His lover left, and his business startup was far from going as smoothly as he had imagined. The brothers who had vowed to create a great future together all backed out when faced with difficulties. In the end, only I was left by his side. He would take me with him when he went out to discuss business, but he always insisted that I shouldn't drink. Even if the client asked him to drink on my behalf and demanded triple the amount, he would still pour down glasses of liquor without hesitation. He said that was all he could do for me. I understood his implication. He knew how I felt about him, but he didn't accept it. I often sent Ethan, who was drunk out of his mind, home late at night, and because of that, I often stayed overnight at Ethan's family's place. Ethan's grandpa liked me very much. In the year when we closed our first big business deal, Ethan's grandpa forced Ethan to marry me. On the eve of the wedding, Ethan sat on the porch with a bottle of liquor in his hand, looking at me with a worried expression. "Yvonne, for so many years, I've only regarded you as a friend." I felt a pang of sadness in my heart, but still gently held his hand. "It doesn't matter. We'll still be friends in the future." It was only after we got married that I learned that Ethan had agreed to marry me just to make one last attempt, hoping that our wedding would prompt Yolanda to come back. Although I was the main character in that grand wedding, it wasn't held for me. In the first year of our marriage, he never set foot in the master bedroom. Until one day when he was drunk as a skunk. Before he passed out, he held my hand and said to me, "Yvonne, let's live a good life together from now on." I was almost moved to tears. Was his heart finally starting to have a place for me? I helped him take off his coat and accidentally lit up his phone screen. A message from Yolanda 2 hours ago. "Ethan, I won't come back anymore." So that was it. Yolanda wouldn't come back to the country anymore, so he could marry anyone. At that time, I thought that even if it was like this, it didn't matter. At least his first choice was me, wasn't it? And Ethan did keep his word. His life consisted of only the company and our family. My sincere feelings finally moved him. In these 2 years, although we couldn't be said to be extremely affectionate, we were at least respectful to each other. I thought that with the passage of time, even if Yolanda came back, it wouldn't change anything. However, reality slapped me in the face. Compared with Yolanda, I was never worth mentioning. After handling Grandpa's funeral arrangements, I went to the company to resign. When passing by the secretary's office, I saw a familiar figure. It was Yolanda. When I walked into the office, the other employees immediately stood up to greet me. "Madam Boss, you're here." I signaled to the nearest employee with my eyes. Shaoli leaned close to my ear and whispered, "The general manager's secretary arranged by manager Ethan. She just started today." Ethan was actually so eager to have her by his side. Yolanda also saw me. Different from the pitiful look she had at the funeral that day, today she looked like a shrewd and capable professional woman. She smiled fakely and said in a neither humble nor overbearing tone, "Hello, Supervisor Yvonne." I was the supervisor of the finance department. But most of the employees in the company were old employees from the startup stage, so they liked to call me Madam Boss directly. In contrast, her little tricks were quite obvious. I casually asked, "Are you getting used to the work?" She casually tossed her long curly hair, looking extremely charming with every gesture. "Very used to it. After all, Manager Ethan and I have known each other for so many years. We still have some mutual understanding." I smiled faintly. "That's good. I was afraid you might not be able to handle it." She probably didn't expect that I would ignore her provocation like this. She stood there looking a bit resentful. I went back to the finance department to hand over my work, said goodbye to everyone, and then left with my box in my arms. When I reached the company entrance, Yolanda, not knowing any better, chased after me. "Yvonne." I turned around at the sound. She probably thought that her reappearance had successfully made Ethan drive me out of the company, and she was smiling smugly. "Yvonne, do you believe that Ethan has never loved you?" The provocative words came out of her red lips. She was as enchanting as a femme fatale. "I believe it. I admitted it calmly. She was like punching cotton. She stared at me angrily. I still maintained a gentle smile. As the company's Madam Boss, I feel it necessary to remind you that the position of General Manager's secretary is very important. It's better not to bring your old habits of stealing small things to work. Yolanda was so irritated by my words that her face turned pale. Her eyes were like burning with fire, as if she was going to burn me to ashes in the next second. However, she suddenly furrowed her brows, and her eyes were instantly filled with tears, looking at me pitifully. Supervisor Yvonne, if you don't like me, I can leave. Don't resign. I won't make Ethan feel awkward. Oh, I didn't need to turn around to know that Ethan was coming. Yolanda's acting skills have never been good, but she has always been able to manipulate Ethan completely. Perhaps love really can blind people. Ethan stood beside me, while Yolanda lowered her eyes, looking aggrieved. I looked at him calmly, waiting for him to question me indiscriminately as he did in college about why I was bullying Yolanda. However, when he opened his mouth, he asked me, "Are you going to resign?" I nodded. "I've already handed my resignation letter to your assistant." Ethan was a bit displeased. He tilted his head slightly, giving off a strong sense of oppression. The little assistant was intimidated by his look and stammered, unable to say a word. "You don't have to make it difficult for him." I forced it on him. I spoke up to relieve the little assistant. "You can stay and work. You were the one who built this company from the ground up." He still knew that I had worked hard and done everything to build this company, but then he turned around and let Yolanda parachute in as the general manager's secretary without even giving me a heads up. No need. I'll take what I deserve. It's better for us to be clear about things. After saying that, I walked around them and walked away. I could vaguely hear Yolanda saying something coquettishly behind me, and Ethan was comforting her in a gentle tone. I laughed at myself. I guess I could be considered as helping a couple of lovers finally get together. In the afternoon, I went home to pack my luggage. Every table and chair in the house was carefully arranged by me. I really had thought about living a plain and simple life with Ethan like this. However, on the night when Ethan's grandpa was critically ill, I called his cell phone countless times, but there was no response. I watched Grandpa lying quietly there through the door of the intensive care unit, with tubes all over his body. Only the constantly flashing numbers on the monitor proved that Grandpa was still alive. I sat alone outside the ICU, hugging my arms until dawn. When Ethan arrived the next day, Grandpa was already on his deathbed. Ethan and I knelt in front of the hospital bed. He held my hand tightly and solemnly promised Grandpa that he would be good to me. I was extremely touched and secretly made up my mind to take good care of Ethan and be his virtuous wife. Until his assistant accidentally revealed that he had gone to the airport to pick up Yolanda. At that moment, I felt like a joke. My obsession with him for so many years seemed to disappear suddenly. There were so many things I wanted to take with me, but in the end, I only packed a small suitcase and took the small fish tank on the cabinet. The two little goldfish inside were swimming merrily. When I got back to my parents' house, my mom was cooking. Seeing me back, she hurriedly prepared to cook a few more dishes. Since my father passed away, her mental state had been rather unstable. Afraid of shocking her, I only said that Ethan was on a business trip and I was bored by myself, so I moved back to live for a few days. At night, I was lying in the empty room, boredly scrolling through my phone. I saw on Xiao Li's WeChat moments that the secretary's office was having a dinner party to welcome the new colleague. Ethan, who had never participated in employees' dinner parties before, also went and was surrounded by everyone. Yolanda was sitting beside him, her head slightly tilted towards his shoulder, smiling brightly. I turned off my phone irritably and threw it aside. In a daze of sleepiness, I dreamed that Ethan was holding Yolanda's hand and smiling at me, saying, "I'm here to let you know that we're getting married." I woke up instantly, with a layer of cold sweat on my forehead. Suddenly, the phone rang, sounding rather abrupt in the quiet night. "Yvonne, it's already 11 o'clock. Why aren't you home yet?" Ethan's voice was a bit drunk and sounded much more affectionate than usual. "I've moved back to my parents' house." I'll go back to move all my things away after we finish the formalities next month. Yvonne, do you really have to divorce me? His tone had a hint of coquettishness. Was he feigning drunkenness? Having seen the gentle look in his eyes when he was looking at Yolanda on WeChat moments, I was extremely sober at the moment. Ethan, we don't love each other. Let's just get divorced, what did you say? His voice suddenly became cold and harsh. The next second, the sound of glass breaking came through the receiver, accompanied by his painful cry. I guessed that he had been cut by the broken pieces, but I didn't say anything. He seemed to be shocked by my indifference. After all, in the past, I would have been more worried if he got hurt than if I myself was scratched. Get some rest early, I said coldly and immediately hung up the phone. Ethan seemed to be avoiding me. From time to time, I would call him to ask about the progress of the property transfer, but most of the time, it was his assistant who answered, saying that he was either in a meeting or on a business trip. Occasionally, Yolanda would answer the phone, saying coquettishly that manager Ethan was busy. Who knows whether he was busy with work or reminiscing about the past with his old lover. However, with the connections I had accumulated over the years, I successfully found a new job. It was a well-known listed company with a promising development prospect. Although I went from being a supervisor to an ordinary employee, I was full of enthusiasm. As I got busy with work, I gradually put the divorce matter aside. Before the Mid-Autumn Festival, the company distributed mooncake gift boxes. I waited for a long time but couldn't get a taxi with all the big and small bags in my hands. A white Cayenne drove up. It was Max, a colleague from my department. Max had just graduated from college. He came from a wealthy family and always dressed like a rebellious teenager. He was enthusiastic and outgoing. He slammed on the brakes and stopped in front of me. He tilted his head through the car window and grinned cheekily, asking, "Sister Yvonne, where do you live? Let me give you a ride." It's not easy to get a taxi at this time. In the 1 month since I started working here, I had seen at least 3 girls sitting in his passenger seat. I didn't want to trouble him and tried to decline, asking him to go first. But he directly opened the door, got out of the car, and took the things in my hands and put them in the car. Max was so enthusiastic that it was hard to refuse him. I could only follow him and sit in the passenger seat. I thanked him, but he didn't take it seriously and smiled with his eyes narrowed. We're colleagues. It's the least I could do. Besides, you helped me today. Otherwise, I would have been scolded to death by the supervisor. He was referring to the fact that he had made a mistake in the accounts this morning and I had noticed and corrected it in time. Max was exaggerating. The supervisor would never dare to scold him. He had always been polite to Max's colleagues, were all saying that he was the young master of the company, coming down to experience life. Max was very talkative and could chat about anything under the sun, unlike Ethan, who was always taciturn and it was hard to tell his emotions. Thinking of Ethan really gave me a headache. He couldn't let go of his first love on one hand, and on the other hand, he was dragging his feet about divorcing me. What on earth did he want? To enjoy the company of 2 women? I helplessly raised my hand and pinched the space between my eyebrows, which was noticed by Max. Sister Yvonne, are you carsick? Then I'll drive slower. Then he really drove at a snail's pace to my house. Along the way, I almost heard about his growth process from primary school to university. When we arrived at my house, out of politeness, I invited him to come in and sit for a while. To my surprise, he readily agreed and even stepped forward to take the bags in my hands. This scene was just seen by my mom, who was coming back from buying groceries. Max greeted her enthusiastically, but my mom only smiled reluctantly. Obviously, she had misunderstood our relationship. She didn't even let him in the door, only asking him to drive carefully and giving him the hint to leave, which was a bit too obvious. Back home, my mom sat on the sofa without saying a word. To break the awkward atmosphere, I poured a cup of chrysanthemum tea and placed it in front of her. My mom looked up and glanced at me. Tell me, what's going on between you and Ethan? What could be going on? I took a sip of water to hide my guilt. My mom suddenly got excited. Yvonne, you didn't cheat on him, did you? How old is that kid? Is he even an adult? You really have the nerve. I choked on the water and my face turned red from holding my breath. What was my mom talking about? Max might look a bit immature, but he was definitely not a minor. I coughed for a while before finally managing to say a complete sentence. Mom, don't talk nonsense. He's my colleague. He just gave me a ride on his way. Ethan is really on a business trip. If you don't believe me, you can ask his assistant. Hearing what I said, my mom's mood calmed down a bit, but she was still a bit skeptical. Yvonne, when you're married, you have to be responsible for your family. Mom knows you've liked good-looking boys since you were little, but when you're married, you can't be fickle, right? So I was still a flirt in my mom's eyes. Well, if I weren't a flirt, how could I have liked Ethan for so many years? Finally having a holiday, I slept until late in the morning and was woken up by the clanging sound of kitchen utensils. I walked out in a daze. Was I still asleep? Why did I see Ethan wearing an apron and cooking in my house? My mom was sitting on the sofa watching TV. Seeing me, she immediately shouted, "You're finally awake. Go wash up. Your husband has come to pick you up." Ethan turned to look at me and a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Go wash up. We'll be able to eat soon. For a moment, I thought I had gone back to the time before Yolanda returned to the country. I didn't come to my senses until I sat at the dining table. Ethan on the opposite side was diligently holding vegetables for my mother. I have to say that although he didn't like me in the past 3 years, he had always been respectful to my parents. After lunch, my mom would take her regular afternoon nap. Ethan was sitting on the sofa with no intention of leaving at all. Aren't you going to work this afternoon? I was subtly hinting at him. Today is Mid-Autumn Festival. The company is on holiday. And it was Mom who called me to come and celebrate the festival together. So it was my mom who called him. No wonder he would come to accompany me to celebrate the festival. When can we go and handle the divorce? Ethan put his index finger to his lips to signal me to be quiet. Don't talk about this. Mom will hear it. I rolled my eyes in exasperation. We sat at opposite ends of the sofa, speechless. He was boredly fiddling with the fish tank on the coffee table. You brought them out. I glanced up and then buried my head in my phone again. I was afraid you'd starve them to death. He chuckled. I really don't understand why you like these two little clownfish so much. This fish tank was won by us when we went shopping together. Last year, he forgot my birthday. When he came home late at night and saw the cake I had prepared, he asked me what gift I wanted. I said I wanted him to accompany me on a shopping trip. In college, Ethan often accompanied Yolanda on shopping trips, happily following her with big and small bags. Now he also accompanied me on shopping trips, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. I guessed he was reluctant. When we were playing ring toss, I couldn't hit the target many times. With the last ring left, Ethan took it over and easily hit the small fish tank. I held the two little goldfish and admired them until midnight. As a result, the next day his assistant sent a huge fish tank to my house. It was filled with all kinds of beautiful fish. He said it was a belated birthday gift for me. All the fish were rare and precious varieties. It's a pity that he didn't understand the preciousness of ordinary little goldfish. My mom cooked dinner. When I went to call Ethan for dinner, he was on the balcony making a phone call. His back was to me, and his voice was soft. Happy Mid-Autumn Festival, Yolanda. It's getting cold. Take care to keep warm. You tend to catch a cold during the season change. A coquettish female voice came from the phone. Ethan, I always can't take good care of myself like this. I'm sorry to have caused you trouble. I'm sorry that I couldn't keep our appointment today. It's okay, Ethan. Have you seen the moon tonight? It's so beautiful. We're looking at the same moon, so it's like we're celebrating the festival together. So he was supposed to accompany Yolanda to celebrate the festival today. I got angry and called out to him impatiently, Ethan, it's time to eat. Ethan turned his head and saw me, then immediately hung up the phone. The corners of his mouth moved as if he wanted to explain something, but I didn't give him the chance and turned around and walked away. After dinner, he still didn't leave and insisted on staying to watch the Mid-Autumn Festival gala with my mom. My mom directly took out a pillow from the cabinet and threw it on my bed. I was so embarrassed that I didn't know what to do, but Ethan was quite calm. He took a towel and went into the bathroom. Yvonne, get me a piece of clothing. Where would I have men's clothes in my house? Just come out wearing your own clothes. But he came out directly with a towel around his waist, his upper body naked. The water droplets on his hair fell on his chest, and I was stunned for a moment. Have you seen enough? Ethan looked at me with a half smile. I rolled my eyes at him. I'm already immune to your body. He looked a bit dejected. I opened the wardrobe, took out a piece of clothing, and threw it to him. Put it on. He picked up the strap of the pink dress with one finger in disgust. This is a nightgown. Right. Otherwise, what other clothes could you possibly fit into? I don't want to wear it. Ethan threw the nightgown away in a huff. I threw it back at him. Either put it on or sleep on the sofa. You choose. After saying that, I ignored him and lay down on the bed, turning my back to him. In the end, he put on his own long shirt and pants and lay down beside me. Ethan, when on earth can we get divorced? I held onto a corner of the quilt and asked him calmly. I have no intention of divorcing you, Yvonne. Haven't we been living well together these past 2 years? But that was all before Yolanda came back, wasn't it? Yolanda is a young girl working alone abroad. It's not easy for her. I arranged for her to be by my side because I was worried that she might be bullied. Suddenly, I remembered that once I accompanied a client to have dinner at a mountaintop restaurant for an order. When the client made inappropriate advances towards me, I managed to escape. The roads in the mountains at night were slippery and difficult to walk on, and occasionally, I could hear the howling of wild animals. I walked for most of the night by the faint light of my mobile phone until I reached the foot of the mountain and got a taxi. My hands were almost numb with cold. The taxi driver kindly turned the air conditioner up to the maximum. At that time, the driver also said to me, "It's really not easy for you, a young girl, to work outside." During the years when Yolanda was safely enjoying her overseas study life, I spent my days building relationships and attracting clients, and my nights staying up late for meetings and writing bid documents. I don't know if Ethan ever felt sorry for me as he did for Yolanda. Yvonne, it's not what you think. We're already married. I won't do anything to betray you. I turned over irritably and met Ethan's pitch-black eyes. Ethan, don't lie to me. On the night when Grandpa was critically ill, I know you went to the airport to pick up Yolanda. You didn't come back that night. Nothing happened that night. Believe me. Nothing happened? Do you even believe that yourself? Let's discuss the property transfer matter in detail later. Let's go and handle the divorce formalities next week. I had made up my mind. Ethan was silent for a long time, and then asked carefully, Yvonne, is it really like what Mom said? Is there a young man pursuing you? Are you attracted to him? I didn't expect that he would suspect me. Out of a sense of revenge, I admitted with a smile, yes. So let's each look for our own happiness. Ethan turned over angrily and sat on the bed silently for a while. Finally, he slammed the door and left. Regarding Ethan's leaving without saying goodbye, my mom knew that there was a problem between us. I simply laid my cards on the table and told her that we were getting divorced. My mom sighed and only said that I should think it over carefully. I was very careful. Love is hard to change. I don't deny that I still love him, but I won't love him as humbly as before. Love has an order of precedence. When I fell in love with Ethan, he was already deeply in love with Yolanda. I was like a peeping Tom, only daring to watch their happiness from a distance. But later, someone dug out my private social media account, on which my unexpressed love for Ethan was densely recorded. The content was screenshot and posted on the school's confession wall. For a while, I was rumored to be the malicious second female lead who intended to disrupt the relationship between the male and female leads. One day in a public class, they were sitting diagonally in front of me, their fingers tightly intertwined. It made my eyes burn and my heart ache. The classmates around me were whispering from time to time, looking at me with mocking eyes. I slunk away from the back door to the bathroom and stood in front of the mirror, patting my face with cold water. Halfway through the class, I suddenly realized that my wallet was missing. I should have left it on the sink when I was taking out a tissue in the bathroom just now. There were 2,000 yuan in cash and a Cartier necklace in it. I quickly went back to look for it, but the sink was empty. I ran to the first floor and asked the security guard to check the surveillance footage, hoping to find the person who had picked up my wallet. Unexpectedly, during the interval between my two trips to the bathroom, only Yolanda had entered and exited the bathroom. When the class was over, I stopped her. "Excuse me, did you pick up a wallet in the bathroom just now?" "I dropped it." Yolanda looked at me timidly, took a half step back, and reflexively grabbed Ethan's arm. Ethan turned around and patted her head to comfort her, and then turned to look at me. "Yvonne, Yolanda didn't pick up your wallet. Look for it carefully again. See if you left it somewhere and forgot about it." After saying that, he pulled Yolanda and walked past me, ready to leave. In a moment of desperation, I grabbed Yolanda's arm. She screamed as if she had been greatly frightened and hid in Ethan's arms. Ethan immediately tensed up. "Yvonne, why are you hitting people? I already said that she didn't see your wallet." I didn't expect that he would unconditionally side with Yolanda like this. "I just went to check the surveillance footage." Only Yolanda entered and exited the bathroom. "It's not wrong for me to ask her, is it?" Ethan looked at Yolanda doubtfully. Yolanda said in a tearful voice, "I really didn't see it." Ethan became confident again. "Did you see Yolanda holding your wallet? Just because she went to the bathroom doesn't mean she took your wallet." I was so angry that I couldn't say a word. Could my wallet have grown legs and run away by itself? More and more classmates gathered around to watch, and various voices started to come from the crowd. How could a good student like Yolanda, who is excellent in both academics and character, steal her wallet? Isn't it because she comes from a poor family and is easy to bully? After all, she just wants to steal someone else's boyfriend. I finally understood what "three men make a tiger" meant. Amid the chorus of condemnation, Ethan led Yolanda out of the crowd with a swagger. I clearly saw the faint smile on Yolanda's lips when she left. However, half a month later, things took a sudden turn. Somehow, the counselor suddenly returned my wallet to me and also issued a notice to expel Yolanda. Although it wasn't stated explicitly, it was already clear that Yolanda had stolen my wallet. Everyone's attitude did a 180-degree turn, and they all condemned Yolanda. Yolanda was instantly labeled as a thief and morally corrupt. Surprisingly, Ethan came to me. He firmly believed that it was a misunderstanding and begged me to clarify things for Yolanda. Ethan blocked my dormitory building and kept saying these things over and over again. "Yvonne, this must be a misunderstanding. Yolanda is so pure and kind. How could she steal things? Now that the wallet has been found, you haven't lost anything. Please, for the sake of us all being classmates, go and clarify things with the school. Yolanda isn't eating or drinking now and is even thinking of killing herself. I beg you to help her and also help me." When I left the dormitory, he would follow me. When I returned to the dormitory, he would squat outside my dormitory building. He squatted there for 3 days without sleeping or eating. My heart softened. He, who was usually so proud, now had dark circles under his eyes and bloodshot eyes, begging me humbly. I couldn't bear to see him like this. Finally, I pleaded with the counselor and had the expulsion penalty for her revoked. Ethan had been dragging his feet about the divorce, and I was so distracted at work that I zoned out during a meeting. The supervisor called my name several times before I heard her. She was just about to scold me when Max suddenly spoke up. "Yvonne, has the work intensity been too much lately? Are you not feeling well?" I quickly apologized. "Sorry, I haven't been in a good state lately." Max really had a lot of face. The strict supervisor actually let me off. "The department has been busy with work lately. You've worked hard. Get some rest." Max raised his eyebrows at me, and I gave a faint smile to express my gratitude. After the meeting, he took credit for it and asked me to treat him to dinner in the evening. "Sorry, I have an appointment tonight. Can we do it another day?" "Hey, you don't want to treat me to dinner, do you? I eat very little. It won't cost you much." I was amused by him. What a strange way of thinking he had. I really do have an appointment. It's a college reunion. Max leaned lazily on the chair. I don't believe you. Unless I take you there. I couldn't argue with him. In the end, he really dropped me off at the entrance of the restaurant before leaving. Yvonne, why are you so late? Where's your husband, Manager Ethan? He's not going to be absent again this year, is he? As soon as I entered the door, my classmates greeted me enthusiastically. I didn't have many friends in college, but now that I was known as Mrs. Ethan, they had to pretend to be friendly even if they didn't really mean it. If they knew we were getting divorced, I don't know how they would mock me in their hearts. I maintained a proper smile. He's been really busy lately. He just went on a business trip yesterday. Hardly had I finished speaking when the door of the private room was pushed open and Ethan walked in, carrying his suit jacket. My smile froze on my face instantly. Didn't he never attend college reunions? Immediately, some male classmates stood up to exchange greetings with him and enthusiastically pushed him to sit beside me. Not wanting to be the subject of others' gossip, I could only pretend to be a loving couple with Ethan. While chatting with others about business matters, he put the dishes I liked into my bowl. When we clinked glasses, he snatched the red wine glass from my hand and poured the wine into his own glass. She can't hold her liquor. I'll drink this for her. The female classmates present immediately let out envious sounds. Manager Ethan is so considerate to his wife. Yvonne is really lucky. He's even more considerate to his first love. Would you like this kind of luck if it were offered to you? Listening to their constant compliments about Ethan, I felt a bit restless. I excused myself to go to the bathroom to get some fresh air. The cool evening breeze by the floor-to-ceiling windows blew on me, making me feel much clearer-headed. Suddenly, a jacket was placed on my shoulders. I turned around and saw that Ethan had followed me out. Why didn't you put on your jacket when you came out? Be careful not to catch a cold. He had never cared about me like this before. His thoughtfulness and gentleness had always been reserved for Yolanda. Ethan, are you trying to win me back? His eyebrows furrowed slightly, but he didn't answer. I have one condition. Ethan's eyes lit up a little. Fire Yolanda and never have any contact with her again in the future. His eyes dimmed again. Yvonne, Yolanda is really pitiful. I just want to help her. I really don't have any other intentions towards her. I smiled helplessly. There are so many girls from poor families in the world. They don't rely on men but work hard with their own hands. I don't know what's so pitiful about Yolanda. See you at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau next Monday. After saying that, I turned around and walked towards the private room. Just as I reached the entrance of the private room, I heard them talking about Yolanda inside. My action of pushing the door paused for a moment. I heard that Yolanda has returned to the country. Why isn't she here today? How could she have the nerve to come? She was caught stealing money. If it were me, I'd never be able to face anyone again in my life. Didn't the counselor clarify that it was a misunderstanding at that time? What misunderstanding? Her roommate saw her secretly trying on the necklace at night. The necklace was exactly the same as the one in Yvonne's lost and found notice. Her roommate reported it to the counselor, and she herself handed over the wallet later. Maybe the counselor said it was a misunderstanding later to avoid affecting the reputation of the college. How could she be such a person? Everyone felt sorry for her before because of her poor family background. I also heard a piece of gossip. She got the opportunity to study abroad on a government scholarship through the son of the dean. It is said that the son of the dean had always been interested in her and they went to study abroad together. What about Ethan? They were so close back then. Ethan was penniless back then. Of course Yolanda chose the son of the dean. And she made Ethan think that she had no choice but to break up because she didn't want a long-distance relationship. Yolanda is so scheming. Truly, you can't judge a person by their appearance. Fortunately, Ethan chose Yvonne. I stood at the door and listened to the whole conversation. I didn't know the details of her breakup with Ethan before. Ethan was standing behind me at some point, but obviously, he had also heard the conversation inside. His clenched fists were trembling slightly, his eyes were a bit red, and his lips were pursed into a straight line. There was so much information that for a moment I couldn't think of any words of comfort. I could only push the door and enter the private room. For the rest of the evening, Ethan was in a really bad mood. He kept pouring liquor into his mouth. Most of my drinks also ended up in his stomach. When the party ended, he walked unsteadily with his arm around my shoulder. As soon as we walked out of the hotel door, we saw Max leaning against the car, fiddling with a lighter in his hand boredly. He looked up and saw me. His eyes lit up with joy, but when he saw Ethan beside me, his eyes hesitated for a moment. "Max, why are you still here?" Max gave a faint smile. "Oh, I was just passing by. I didn't know if you had left yet. I thought if I happened to meet you, I could give you a ride." "And this is?" For a moment, I didn't know how to introduce Ethan. Ethan was dead drunk, burying his head on my shoulder and mumbling vaguely, "Don't go." Max seemed to understand something. I was too lazy to explain to him. Just then, Ethan's assistant drove the car over. I and the assistant helped Ethan into the car unsteadily. Then I turned around and thanked Max. "Max, thank you for tonight. Go home early and be careful." Max waved at me. His figure looked a bit lonely. On Monday morning, I deliberately took a day off from work and waited for him at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau for the whole morning. He never showed up, and no one answered his phone. Remembering his cold face at the college reunion that night, a sense of foreboding came over me. Could something have happened to him? I hurriedly took a taxi to Ethan's family's place. When I opened the door, it was dark inside, and the curtains were tightly drawn. I called softly, "Ethan." But no one answered me. The floor was in a mess, with empty bottles everywhere and dried wine stains on the carpet. Fortunately, Ethan was curled up on the sofa, asleep, still holding half a bottle of wine in his hand. His shirt was half unbuttoned, his hair was messy, and there was clearly visible stubble on his chin. He didn't look at all like his usual elegant self. The last time he was like this was when he learned that Yolanda wouldn't come back to the country. This time, it was obviously because Yolanda had deceived him. His joys, sorrows, and emotions had always been related to Yolanda. I helplessly cleaned up the living room for him and then went to the kitchen to cook a pot of porridge. He woke up at some point, standing silently behind me. I was startled when I turned around and saw him. "Go wash your face. Have some porridge to warm your stomach," I said as I carried the porridge to the dining table. He had ruined his stomach with too many business dinners in the past few years. It took me a long time to cook porridge and make soup for him to gradually get it better. Ethan was like a wooden man, mechanically following my instructions. When he picked up the spoon and took a sip of the porridge, his eyes turned red. "Yvonne, thank you for being so good to me. Anyway, you should live a good life." Ethan lowered his head without saying a word, only mechanically shoving the porridge into his mouth. He had been waiting faithfully for 5 years, only to find out that it was all a scheme planned by Yolanda long ago. His heart must be broken. But his affairs with Yolanda had nothing to do with me anymore. I didn't want to get involved too much. After watching him drink the porridge, I excused myself to leave. Before going out, Ethan stood behind me and asked cautiously, "Yvonne, will you still accept me?" I was a bit distracted. In the end, I didn't turn around or answer him. I calmly walked out the door. As soon as the door closed, my mood was no longer calm. In the relationship between the three of us, it had always been the two of them loving each other passionately, while I was just someone who would show up when he was lonely, using my love to heal the wounds he suffered from Yolanda. But this time, I wouldn't be soft-hearted again. I had originally planned to wait until Ethan got better before going to handle the formalities. Unfortunately, it never rains but it pours. There were problems with Ethan's company. Yolanda's old habits die hard. She accepted bribes from suppliers privately, helped them win the bid, and provided the company with a batch of defective raw materials. Ethan not only lost money but also couldn't deliver the goods to the partners on time. The partners all demanded to sue. This company was built up bit by bit with my hard work, but now I was at a loss too. After much negotiation by Ethan, the partners reluctantly agreed that as long as the losses were compensated, they would not sue. However, the company's funds were far from enough. Ethan was in a terrible mess, looking as if he had aged 10 years overnight. I heard from Shaoli that Yolanda had been transferred to the most marginal department in the company. Sure enough, Ethan still couldn't be cruel enough to her. One day after work, Max and I had just walked to the entrance of the company when Yolanda rushed towards us furiously. When her hand swung over, Max subconsciously blocked in front of me and took a slap from her. Yolanda, are you crazy? I don't know what she had been through during this period. Now she looked like a crazy woman with her hair disheveled, baring her teeth and brandishing her claws as she tried to rush over. Max stretched out an arm to stop her. Yvonne, what on earth did you say to Ethan? Why did he say he never wanted to see me again? It must be you who instigated it. It must be you. Red fingerprints had already emerged on Max's fair skin, and he was trying to avoid letting me see them. My anger rushed straight to my head. Yolanda, aren't you clear about what you've done? Do you need me to remind you how you got the chance to study abroad? Being exposed by me in public, she was stunned for a second, and then continued to be unrelenting and argued unreasonably. It was you who told Ethan. You slandered me. You bitch. Yolanda was about to rush at me again but was held back by the company's security guards, one on each side. Yolanda, I warned you to do your job well. But look what you've done. If it weren't for your taking bribes privately, how could the company have ended up like this? That was the hard work of Ethan and me. I was trembling with anger. That was the company I had worked hard for years to build up, and it was ruined by her overnight. It wasn't me. It has nothing to do with me. I don't know why things turned out like this. She looked really bad, grabbing her hair with both hands and shouting hysterically. Seeing this, no one dared to approach her. I really had no idea what to do with her, so I called Ethan. Ethan rushed over quickly. Yolanda immediately regained her delicate look and threw herself into his arms, crying pitifully, Ethan, please don't ignore me. I love you. I really love you. Ethan looked a bit uncomfortable and stood there stiffly, not reaching out to hug her back. I exchanged a glance with Ethan from a distance. He looked much haggard, with exhaustion showing between his brows. He no longer had that high-spirited look. He seemed to want to say something. His lips moved, but in the end, he said nothing and just watched Max and me leave. Let's go to the hospital to get some medicine on it. Your face seems to be scratched. I was sitting in the passenger seat, looking at Max's right cheek. 2 bloody marks made by fingernails were clearly visible. Max looked in the rearview mirror and said with a smile, your rival has quite a strong hand. Fortunately, it hit me on the face. If it had hit you, it would have disfigured you. He still had the mood to joke. I felt extremely guilty. He seemed to notice my guilt and said casually, treat me to a meal. Consider it compensation. Max seemed particularly keen on getting me to treat him to a meal. I quickly took out my phone to book a table. At the dinner table, when I apologized to him for the 3rd time, he finally couldn't hold it in anymore. He smiled and filled my drink glass. Yvonne, you've said this several times. I've already said it's just a minor injury. And, I'm willing to take a beating for you. He took a sip of water as he said this, secretly looking at me through the glass. Of course I understood what he meant and tried to gently discourage him. I'm already married. He replied quickly, but you're getting divorced. How do you know? You took off your wedding ring. I subconsciously rubbed my ring finger. There was an obvious indentation there because I had been wearing a ring for years. I didn't expect him to be so observant. Ethan and I are getting divorced, so I don't want to think about relationship matters for the time being. I can wait until you fall in love with me. He seemed to suddenly think of something and stammered while clutching his water glass. Or, do you think I wasn't good before? I can explain. I've never been in a relationship. Those girls you saw before were all brought to the company by me on purpose to annoy my dad. Getting excited, Max pounded the table hard. I wish I hadn't done such a stupid thing. I didn't expect that beneath Max's rebellious appearance was such a simple heart that I didn't want to hurt him, so I should reject him more decisively. Max, waiting for someone to fall in love with you is really painful. I used to think that I could move Ethan. I gave up my major to start a business with him. I stayed up the longest nights, ate all kinds of instant noodles, helped him deal with clients outside and manage employees inside. When the company grew to a certain scale, I became his homemaker, taking care of his daily life. But as you can see, none of these could compare to a Yolanda. Waiting for someone who doesn't love you will never work out. So, Max, go and find someone who loves you. You're great and deserve the best. I habitually rubbed my empty ring finger and smiled with relief. Now I just want to focus on my career and hope for better development. I don't want to consider anything else. Max's expression couldn't hide his disappointment, but he still magnanimously raised his glass to me. Yvonne, you will surely get what you wish for. To ease the awkwardness, I raised my glass and gave him a mischievous smile. Let's make it clear first. I don't need to rely on your father to get any special treatment. Max also smiled knowingly, and the two glasses clinked together with a ding, leaving everything unsaid. Just as we walked out of the restaurant, I saw a familiar car parked nearby. Ethan was leaning casually against the car door. I didn't know how he had found this place. I walked slowly up to him. Why are you here? Ethan looked past me at Max behind me, frowned slightly, and then turned his gaze back to my face. Yolanda hasn't been in a good mental state recently. I was afraid you might have been frightened. I'm not that delicate. Where's Yolanda? I informed her parents. They'll come to pick her up and take her back to her hometown. I nodded. There were no more words to say, and the situation was a bit awkward. Ethan pointed to the passenger seat. Let me give you a ride back. I hesitated for a moment, and Max immediately said, let me take you. It's on my way. After thinking for a second, to make Max give up completely, I still chose to get into Ethan's car. Ethan looked a bit flattered and seemed to want to say something but held back all the way. He hesitated for a long time before finally speaking. Yvonne, do you remember? Tomorrow is our 3rd wedding anniversary. Of course I remembered. I had spent the 1st and 2nd anniversaries alone. I gave an almost inaudible as a response. I've booked a table. Can you have dinner with me tomorrow? Now that things have come to this, what's the point of the 3rd wedding anniversary? Ethan, we'd better. Just one meal. I'll give you the answer you want. I kept the appointment. Ethan was sitting by the window, looking quietly out of it. He had lost a lot of weight, and the suit that used to fit him now looked a bit loose on him. He smiled as he watched me sit down. He used to be aloof, but now he had a more peaceful temperament. Ethan, what did you want to tell me today? Let's eat first. We'll talk after that. He beckoned, and the waiter served the dishes one by one. Surprisingly, they were all the dishes I had cooked on our 1st wedding anniversary. That day, I had sat at the dining table waiting for him until all the food had gone cold. Under his gentle gaze, I ate the meal with mixed feelings. Can you talk now? Ethan, however, took out a tissue and leaned slightly forward, wanting to wipe the soup stain from the corner of my mouth. My body instinctively moved back to avoid his hand, but he looked a bit disappointed and handed the tissue to me. Ethan, you don't need to do these useless things anymore. I already gave you a chance before, but you couldn't let go of Yolanda, could you? He lowered his head and slowly took out a box from his pocket. There was a translucent bracelet inside. He sighed before speaking slowly, his tone a bit sad. Yvonne, this bracelet was left by my grandmother for her granddaughter-in-law. I should have given it to you long ago. It's my fault. I firmly believed that I wouldn't cheat on you, but I didn't realize that my concern and help for Yolanda had already crossed the line. All these years, whether it was in business or family life, you were the one who had been making sacrifices for me. I'm sorry to you. Now that you have your own job, I believe you'll do an excellent job with your ability. Max. He seems like a nice guy. I also wish you two well. The corners of Ethan's eyes were a bit wet. He raised his hand slightly to cover it up and then took out a card from his pocket and handed it to me. This is all the savings I have now. It's all for you. As for the company, I plan to sell it. It should be enough to pay off the debts. I was a bit surprised when he suddenly said these things. After being stunned for a moment, I pushed the card back. Ethan, this is our joint property as a couple. Let's divide it equally. No, Yvonne, this is what you deserve. I'll bear the consequences of my own actions. He forcefully stuffed the card into my hand. His hand holding mine was trembling. It was you who accompanied me from having nothing to achieving some success. Now I'm back to having nothing again, but this time I can't drag you down. He looked at me with an ugly smile, as if it was really difficult for him to say that sentence. Yvonne, let's get divorced. At the moment he said divorce, my feelings were complicated, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what they were. The love I had been obsessed with for years came to an end. Going round and round, both my career and family life have gone back to the starting point. I don't know how things have developed to this point step by step, but I believe everything will get better. I gently comforted him. Ethan, I believe you can definitely make a comeback. All the past will be let go, and I will become a better version of myself.